Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Bresnahan. I'm a marketing manager here at CyberSaint. Welcome to today's webinar, Admitting Defeat, when to know it's time to supplement your legacy IT GRC systems. This is going to be a conversation in a fireside chat type format between our principal solutions architect, Steve Torino, and myself. And we're going to be kind of talking through some of the stories that Steve has heard and experienced with some of our largest customers as they've come to grips with the fact that it's time to supplement their existing IT GRC stack. Before we go ahead and get started, this recording obviously will be available after as a recording. So please do feel free to submit questions throughout. We'll be addressing them at the end. And so, Steve, to kick things off, having worked so closely with some of our largest customers, including members of the Fortune 50, I'm wondering if you've seen any trends with what are some of the driving forces for an organization, for a security leader to approach an organization like CyberSaint and say, we need help to improve and actually sort of modernize our IT GRC stack.
Yeah, there most definitely are some trends, kind of high level, starting out with top-down sort of mandates, right? It's coming from the board or executive levels, looking for more visibility into cyber risk posture. So that's a big one. Another one that we see fairly often is understaffed security organizations. Or really, I think you could describe it as just kind of lack of sufficient staffing for the security organization. So that's another common use case. Embracing IRM is another one. So organizations who are looking to standardize on a single system of record for a variety of the different functions that comprise the cyber risk IT sort of ecosystem within the organization. And then also just around custom frameworks and approaches to risk. So we see, especially in the enterprise, a lot of companies that they've had their own methodology, their own way of dealing with this stuff for quite some time. And they're looking for solutions that can sort of accommodate their way of looking at risk instead of sort of forcing them to accommodate some other workflow. So those would be some of the large buckets.
Gotcha. So diving into sort of this board and CEO mandate archetype category, can you speak a little bit more to the companies that you're seeing and interacting with that are experiencing these top-down mandates from the board and CEO? Especially in terms of enhancing their risk and compliance capabilities. And, if you can give sort of a high-level example, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'd start out by saying when customers come to us with a board or CEO mandate, this is usually actually a pretty good sign. In order to push your cyber posture and maturity up over time, you can get to a certain level just within the IT security staff themselves, but really getting that buy-in from executive leadership is key to getting to the next level. Some of the drivers that we're seeing regularly, more and more, I think good cyber posture is an enabler of gaining additional business, right? So when we go and purchase or try to sell our services or our technologies, our customers are asking, what's your cyber posture look like? We need to see your papers. So that's a pretty important driver, I think. And we also see a lot around sort of enabling digital transformation. So organizations are looking to transform in different areas of the business, and they're seeing IT and cyber as being a key part of that, right? The last thing you want to do is start getting into some really expensive initiative that you put a lot of resources into, and then only to find out towards the end that there's some big hole in cyber, and you need to kind of push things back and get your hands wrapped around that. And then just the overall trend, I think we've been seeing this one for quite some time, is greater visibility from a executive level into cyber posture. And they're asking questions more detailed maybe than they would in the past. So instead of just kind of, how's our cyber posture doing? Thumbs up, everything's fine. It's becoming more and more questions around, well, what's your methodology? What's the data that's backing this up? What's the process that's going into understanding where we stand? So those are some of the trends that we see, pretty regularly. And then in some of the largest organizations that we've worked with, they actually have entire teams that are empowered by executives to go and search for different ways of doing things to sort of disrupt the status quo in certain business functions. So cyber risk tends to be an area that is kind of ripe for that. A lot of organizations have been handling it the same way for quite some time, frequently through spreadsheets and things like that, even with different GRC tools in place. So that's another trend that we see.
Interesting. So kind of building off of what you were talking about, sort of digital transformation as being a big driver, especially in sort of this category of a board CEO mandate. From sort of your boots on the ground perspective, are you seeing sort of a direct correlation between these mandates and digital transformation initiatives? Or are you seeing boards and CEOs that may not necessarily be sort of shouldering a digital transformation initiative, but are as well interested in greater visibility and sort of supplementing with something like CyberStrong?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the two, and then particularly in the climate that we're in right now, just some of the events over the last several weeks, SolarWinds over the last couple of months, really, that water district in Florida, and then even to some extent what's been going on in Texas, even though that wasn't caused by any sort of cyber issue, I think it opens people's eyes up to the vulnerability of critical infrastructure and the fact that it potentially could have been. So we see more and more of these large-scale incidents taking place in the news. I think it's causing conversations to be had at different levels, certainly including the board and executive levels.
That definitely, and that dovetails well with sort of my next question in this category around, from your just pure, whether it's speculation or an educated guess, what are some of the precursors that you're seeing as it relates to sort of this shift in perspective from the board and CEO? We are sort of seeing the indicators of increased scrutiny and interest from the board. And to your point, a lot of these cyber events that kind of happen in the public eye can be a driver, but are you seeing any other sort of motivating factors for this sort of approach to supplementing an IT GRC stack?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it depends, on industries and verticals. We do a lot of business with the defense industrial base, and they have requirements that have come out over the last year or so with CMMC, for instance. But if I'm speculating, I think that that's probably going to continue to be a trend. I think it'll be requirements for other government agencies in procurement outside of just the Department of Defense that are going to be having requirements for the supply chain around what their security looks like.
Definitely. So kind of moving on from, if this is sort of our top-down movement, we're looking more so at the bottom up. So sort of a spread too thin cybersecurity organization, as you said, kind of motivated by this cybersecurity skill shortage that we're all very much aware of. Can you give us an example of the companies that are turning to cyber risk automation as a means to supplement potentially anemic cybersecurity program?
Yeah, I think there's a few points we could touch on here and a few examples. One particularly over the last year with sort of like reduction in headcount due to some of the economic consequences of everything that's been going on with the pandemic. We have seen a number of organizations that have come to us and just with the understanding that headcount was cut, and the team that remained is just not going to be able to continue the work using some of the processes that they've been using in the past when they had a larger staff to sort of spread it out among. That's something that we've definitely been seeing. And then this one probably isn't going away either. I mean, even if we could open up budgets to hire as many cyber resources and risk resources as we possibly could, there is still just a shortage in general, in the industry. So we don't really see this one probably going away anytime soon.
Definitely. And so especially to that point, sort of pulling in resources outside of the InfoSec organization, right? With a lot of assessments and sort of control tasks being completed by potentially people outside of the information security organization. Therefore, it's not necessarily a priority for them. What are some of the downstream effects of enlisting non-security folks to help conduct these assessments? And sort of what's the worst case scenario that could go wrong when you don't have a strong enough organization to conduct these things on their own?
Well, I think worst case scenario, like a lot of things involving technology, is human error. And so when we're trying to manage this business function through ways that are kind of prone to human error, like across spreadsheets, and then you have to worry about version control and pulling together reports from information where maybe there isn't a consistent definition of what certain responses are. Those are some of the issues I think that we've seen. But then also just from a workflow perspective, this statistic on on the screen here, this is from one of our existing customers saying that over 50, and I personally probably think it's a lot higher than that, of the individuals taking part in different InfoSec assessments, that's not really their primary job. And so, wow, you get a little bit of diminishing return, I think, on both sides there, because maybe you're not getting quite as strong metrics delivered around what your postures actually looks like. Maybe things are taking a little bit longer because other folks have a day job to do. And then on the other hand, those individuals who are tasked with their day job in other areas, whether it's identity and access management or vulnerability management or help desk or whatever the case may be, they're having to take time away from the other tasks that they're actually paid to do full time.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And then therefore, kind of looking at some of these indicators, you kind of see the downstream effects of delayed assessment responses results in sort of delayed proof of compliance. And especially to your earlier point around the DoD, with the shift towards CMMC, these sort of no-go approaches to compliance, you are going to start seeing, if you don't have a appropriately staffed or an appropriately resourced cybersecurity organization, these sorts of effects are sort of the impact of what can happen without an augmented or a better staffed cybersecurity team.
Yeah, and in fact, using CMMC as an example, they have the different maturity levels, and as you start getting into levels 3, 4, and 5, there's definitely a requirement to have adequately resourced teams, and to make sure that information is being shared appropriately across the organization with executives who are then understanding what the posture currently is, understanding where the pain points are, allocating resources appropriately, and then setting the tone really at the top.
Sure, definitely. So, kind of transitioning over to what could be described as sort of an in the middle situation, not necessarily top down, and not necessarily bottom up, but sort of what we may call sort of the organizations that are going pure play integrated risk management, the ones that are embracing sort of this integrated and cross-functional approach to cybersecurity program management. What are you seeing as some of the catalysts for these organizations when it comes to shifting their organizations towards a more integrated approach, as well as sort of the aha moment when they realize that the modular legacy GRC systems are not necessarily going to cut it with this new organizational structure?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because you have different sort of silos within the organization, whether the silos exist because of the technology that they're using or just because of some of the cultural characteristics of the organization. But you have teams like risk teams who they have certain metrics and they have certain information that's obviously really valuable to inform the decisions that the organization is going to make. And then you have compliance teams who also have similar information, and security teams who have other similar information. So it makes a lot of sense to bring it all together into one platform, just cutting out those silos entirely and being able to present those metrics, in the way that executives are looking for. And then also, I think, there's opportunities to bring other business functions in there as well. Things like third-party risk management, and not having to purchase an additional module or get some other budget approved to enable having additional use cases in the same platform. It's just kind of open there for as many use cases as can possibly be accommodated. And I think, we've seen a lot of customers who they'll kind of start out maybe with one or two, and then see the capabilities or potentials to add some additional ones down the road as they mature.
Definitely, and kind of expanding on that, our chief product officer Patrick and I were talking about this on our webinar last week about sort of this idea of this new class of technologies that's coming along, is sort of the connective tissue between these very established platforms, and especially, are you seeing with these sort of pure play IRM organizations that they're especially looking for a solution that may not necessarily be a rip and replace type approach, but one that's going to enable, say, whatever platform the risk team, the compliance team, the audit team is using to be able to connect all those things, rather than something that's forcing all of those teams to jump on board right away. You can kind of land and expand from there.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the trend. And then with capabilities around integrations with some of these additional tools that are established and already in place, and frankly used by other divisions within organizations too. Rip and replace is not always the ideal way of approaching it. So I think sitting alongside of some of these more kind of organizationally established technologies and being able to glean information from them as is needed and push information back into them as well is really more of the trend that we're seeing versus a rip and replace.
Definitely, and I think that it kind of speaks to a greater theme of this conversation is that you may have those moments where you look at your legacy GRC stack and you say like you're not happy with the experience, but that said, the data that's stored within is still just as valuable, if not more so, with something to layer on top of it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and just also the frequently the amount of time and money that's gone into setting those technologies up as well. It's just yeah.
And so it almost flies in the face to be able to try to promise a rip and replace before the organization is ready. The better way to do it is sort of making the legacy IT GRC stack more operable in sort of the post-digital era, in the digital era. So transitioning to sort of our fourth and last category for sort of the defeated groups, looking at the orgs that are inherently, it seems to be, more mature in that they have taken it upon themselves to develop their own custom frameworks that they operate with. How are you seeing them sort of come to the realization that the rigid modular systems just aren't cutting it for them anymore?
Yeah, I think that there's, a lot of the enterprise organizations, one of the ways that they've sort of approached the increasing complexity around all the different frameworks and standards that are coming out, whether it's security or now these days increasingly privacy, is through things like a common control framework, for example, where we have a really large, robust set of controls, maybe, or a large questionnaire set, and that we're choosing from that control set to push out into different areas of the organization as applicable. So, you might have a large set and only some number of those are applicable to operational technology systems, and some other set are applicable to IT systems, just in a simplified example. So what organizations are frequently looking for is a solution that can accommodate their existing process versus the other way around, of sort of having to force them into a new way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That definitely makes a lot of sense, and kind of dovetails well with our conversation earlier about sort of finding those solutions that are going to be able to help you gradually shift the experience, the processes, the workflows, rather than having to all at once, whether you're working with one team or whether you're one of those, the pure play IRM company that has 4 teams on the same platform. It is going to require a shift, and it's a matter of deciding whether or not you want it to be gradual, or whether you're prepared for something as sort of cut and dry as just a full-blown new platform, right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's other interesting work that we're doing around things like automating the ingestion of telemetry from within the security tech stack and mapping that controls in an automated way, which kind of helps also, I think, with that second use case that we talked about of just having smaller teams or not having enough security resources on staff. But as in particular, one thing I wanted to mention around automation work that we're doing as pertains to this particular use case has to do with automated crosswalking. So the ability to kind of assess yourself once against a framework or standard and then project the results of that assessment onto additional ones. We're getting a lot of interest from customers around our ability to do that and to sort of streamline the process and save a lot of man hours in the process.
And it is sort of that crosswalking feature is deeper than sort of what most people have come to expect. I think a lot of, especially when we talk about crosswalking, I think there's kind of almost a dispersed definition that everyone kind of has their own definition in their head. But the NLP that's at work here, that's patented by CyberSaint, it integrates on a much deeper level. Isn't that right?
It does, because what the NLP is able to do. So traditionally, I think crosswalking is sort of a search for an exercise in like searching for common keywords, which is, I guess, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't really fully solve the problem. What the NLP is able to do is really understand the intent in a control language from one framework and map that to the intent in the control language in another. So, you might have one control that's talking about whitelisting and another control that's talking about blacklisting, but the the intent there is very similar, and the technology can associate similar controls like that.
Gotcha. Very, very exciting stuff. For folks in the audience, expect to hear more about that in the coming months, for sure. So, Steve, to kind of start to land the plane here. CyberStrong is sort of one of those products that people come looking for as far as ways to integrate and enhance their existing IT GRC stack. Can you kind of give us a little bit of an overview of how organizations are applying CyberStrong in this supplementary and sort of expansive context as opposed to a rip and replace?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, maturity is a journey. And we have customers really at all levels of it. We have some who are starting out just really compliance centric. Maybe there's a requirement they have from their customers. It could be like a SOC 2 or something like that, or a PCI. And that's really the driver for their program. And we have use cases like that. But what we've built out is a platform that can accommodate some through a variety of different workflows and through a variety of different advanced features like automation and crosswalking, the ability to standardize in one platform to kind of walk you through all the different steps of maturity. So whether you're just kind of starting out what we're calling here level 1, where you're working just out of spreadsheets and email, there may be no systems in place to support the process, and you're just looking to kind of get started, or you're getting more towards level 4 and 5 over here, you probably have multiple GRCs in place potentially. We can sit alongside those, we can supplement without the need to rip and replace any of the existing technology. Gotcha.
And then sort of kind of moving into this, especially recently, we were highlighted by Gartner and sort of our automation capabilities and sort of that control score automation that you were talking about. Any other sort of, we can kind of skip through this slide as far as our Gartner coverage. But lastly, especially this cool vendor coverage, I do want to touch on that a little bit more as it relates to the control scoring automation and sort of the value there to some of these more mature organizations that have these situations, whether it's sort of the top down, bottom up, or these sort of in the middle experiences. How are you seeing organizations leverage the automation to achieve this goal and sort of reactivate their legacy GRC systems?
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to maybe talk a little bit about our approach to automations here through integrations.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
So we kind of define it in two different ways. It's one that we would refer to as like a static mapping, whereby we can ingest a source of telemetry and understand that just by virtue of using a technology like, let's say, a vulnerability scanner, for example, and running that technology on some regular cadence, that you're going to get some credit. It may be partial, it may be full. We kind of determine that with you on those controls in an automated way. So that's one example of it. So I think from a Gartner perspective and the Cool Vendor award that we received last year, that's really getting into some capabilities we have around the natural language processing that can identify keywords or phrases within the telemetry source itself, and then map those or suggest some additional controls that you may want to impact the score on either up or down based on what we're seeing in the wild. So it's a really unique approach. There's a lot of different use cases for it. We have customers looking at all different types of technology to integrate with, from vuln scanners to identity and access management to SIMs and native cloud native tools and things like that. So definitely a lot to come with that.
Gotcha. And so to kind of wrap things up, having looked at some of the major trends in these enterprise organizations as they kind of reimagine their approach to risk and compliance, from a really high level perspective, Steve, why do you think we're seeing so many organizations look to these supplementary technologies now? Like, why now? Is it that these technologies, this approach of supplementing existing systems didn't exist before? Or what do you think is sort of the driving forces behind all of these factors?
I think it is that the technology has evolved significantly, particularly over the last several years. I mean, even the technology that we're using to achieve some of the more advanced automation use cases around like natural language processing, 10 years ago, I think you would have had to go to Carnegie Mellon or MIT to study that. And now it's sort of more available, and people are learning on how to use it and what additional use cases it can be applied to. But I also think it's a reflection of kind of where we stand in cyber in general, and understanding the stakes with so many big name organizations having different events, and them getting highly publicized. I think it's just very front and center for a lot of organizations, and they're looking for visibility and understanding that many of the technologies that we've been using to manage this function over the years are just not really cutting it when it comes to presenting the information in the way that's required of us, whether it's just because we want to have good security posture ourselves, or more frequently because we have either regulatory imposed or customer imposed requirements.
Sure. So last question for you. Of these 4 core categories that we talked about today, which of these do you think we're going to be seeing more of in the next 18 to 24 months?
I think the first two, the board mandated one, I think there's definitely more and more interest all the time from that level of visibility and understanding into posture. And then I also think number 2 there, from the understaffed security organization, I don't personally see that problem going away anytime soon. So I think those are probably the 2 over the next year and a half to 2 years.
Awesome. Definitely, completely agree. Well, Steve, this has been great. Any parting thoughts before we sign off? It looks like we're short on questions today, but any parting thoughts?
Yeah, just we kind of breezed through some of the functionality here. If anybody would like to learn more, we'd be happy to talk to you. So feel free to reach out, and we can get you all the information you need.
Definitely, yes. As Steve said, feel free to reach out, info@cybersaint.io. Feel free to check us out. We will be adding attachments to this talk as well, so feel free to avail yourself of those. We'll be adding some white papers on our automation capabilities, and be sure to keep an eye out on our channel for our talk next week around migrating to the cloud while maintaining risk and compliance posture. All right, awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. This was great.
Thanks, Ethan.
Take care.